The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to start the show a little bit differently today. Instead of talking about the day's news, which we'll get to, and we've got a very interesting interview coming up for you today, I want to talk about a topic that's getting more and more attention. And that's the topic of universal basic income, or some version of it. We've talked about a negative income tax. The point is an idea of a non-means tested source of money for people, regardless of employment, with the potential to lift a significant number of people out of poverty. And if you've been watching the show for any length of time, you know that I'm in favor of something like this. And sometimes we've answered audience questions about would I prefer a universal basic income or a negative income tax? Do I have a preference? Do I think that all social welfare benefits should be eliminated along with their respective bureaucracies and sort of consolidated into one non-means tested universal basic income, or do we want to try to target based on income levels? Big picture, I believe that something like it is simply going to be a necessity, right? As we rethink society in the next 10 to 20 years, really are sort of forced to rethink society due to automation and technological unemployment and the continued destruction of jobs, elimination of jobs, as a result of technological advances and changes to our sort of socioeconomic status quo. But in the past, I've not just been completely effusive and a cheerleader of UBI with no caveats, right? I've expressed some concerns in the past about how UBI would actually be implemented and what the effect would be or should be or could be. And there's a very interesting article in TruthDig that I read yesterday, which reminded me that this is an issue I've been wanting to tackle for a while, and why not today? And I don't want to be cynical, right? And I haven't wanted to be cynical when talking about UBI in the past, but I've said that when you see a bunch of ultra-rich CEOs and founders of some of the biggest corporations, especially in tech and e-commerce companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, when you see companies like that and their CEOs and founders emphatically and enthusiastically for universal basic income, we should be cautiously optimistic, right? Hoping that they're in favor of it for the right reasons. But we also want to kind of verify, why are they so thrilled with the idea of universal basic income? And case in point, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Richard Branson, Bill Gates, some less well-known sort of oligarch rich guys like Stuart Butterfield, they've all expressed that they like the idea of universal basic income. So, okay, that's great, but we need to really put a critical eye on why they are so in favor of it, and also how universal basic income could be sort of appropriated for the good of what are kind of modern day oligarchs, right? The ultra-rich founders of these major corporations. And if you think about, one way to think about this would be to say, all right, well, if we put in universal basic income, what wouldn't change? Like, what would stay the same if we put in UBI? And that can start to sort of give us an idea about why it might be appealing to some of the biggest corporations on the planet. If you put in UBI, business and market regulation doesn't change. It remains the same. Living wage requirements for people who are working don't change simply because you put in universal basic income. Labor conditions for people working in not great conditions, right? Whether it's sweatshops or whatever the case may be, labor conditions aren't automatically upgraded because everybody gets $8,000 a year or $11,000 a year or whatever the proposal might say in universal basic income. College is no more affordable just because you give people universal basic income, other than sort of by the obvious nature of them having a little bit more money. But the problem of the explosive cost of a college education, that doesn't change merely because you have universal basic income. It's simply not part of it. And in fact, there are many companies that say they want universal basic income that are the same companies that are creating a need for it. Outsourcing, automation, pillaging of natural resources, gigantic carbon footprints. Some of these companies eliminate the need for a lot of these jobs, so they would want people receiving universal basic income because that's going to give them back customers that they would otherwise lose. If you start putting people out of work in the United States because you outsource production to China, for example, some of those people in the US are no longer going to be able to afford your product or service anymore. Have the government give them a basic income, and now all of a sudden they get back into the possible pool of your customers. It's perfect. And one of the big tenets, or maybe better said, one of the characteristics of neoliberalism is free market and corporate power. Setting up universal basic income could very easily be used to, number one, just create more customers for the corporations responsible for eliminating a lot of these jobs. And number two, universal basic income could be used to push back against regulation and minimum wage laws and other pro-worker laws, right? Why do we need to raise the minimum wage? We just put in place universal basic income. Let's keep the minimum wage really low, which benefits these really large corporations. Except that by keeping the minimum wage low, the corporations keep making their executives richer off of profits at the expense of paying workers a living wage, and they can hide behind the creation of UBI. And in fact, we already see this, right? Companies like McDonald's, Walmart, we've talked about, these companies already in part get away with paying the terrible wages and benefits that they pay because lots of their employees get food stamps and other social welfare benefits from the government. Social welfare subsidizes the terrible wages that some of these very profitable companies pay in the United States, and UBI could make that way worse. The so-called gig economy, right? Driving for Uber and Lyft, as an example. Major problems there. Taking advantage of contractors rather than making the drivers employees. We need to be looking at a lot of elements of what's going on there. Throw in a basic income, give everybody $9,000, $11,000, $13,000 a year. Well, why are we going to now get involved in making Lyft and Uber change their model? Yeah, working for them doesn't pay that much, but we passed UBI. Don't go after them now. Everybody's got their $8,000 as a base. This isn't an argument against universal basic income, to be clear. This is a word of caution now that UBI is getting more and more attention. It's a word of caution that we need to think critically about this and really think about how it would work in practice. Now, is there a particular answer or solution that I'm bringing up? No, actually, I don't know, right? What I can tell you is that universal basic income needs to work in concert with other really significant structural changes to our society that, quite frankly, I'm pretty skeptical we're going to be making anytime soon. And I remain completely convinced about the need for something like a universal basic income or a negative income tax or some other proposal, some others of which I've been reviewing and will talk to you about. But I'm just as convinced that just dropping $9,000 in everybody's pocket every year or $11,000 isn't going to fix a lot of the structural problems that we have in our socioeconomic reality. And at its core, when you give everybody $9,000, you do nothing to deal with the problem of income and wealth inequality, which has economic consequences, it has social consequences, it has psychological consequences that we've talked about just these drastic and growing disparities between rich and poor. So what I would like to hear from you is specifically what else needs to happen in concert with a universal basic income to actually make this something that would be a net benefit in total, aside from just, again, dropping $9,000 in people's laps, which I think is a good thing. I think that UBI and these concepts are something that is, they're not only good ideas, they're going to be necessary ideas in the next 10 to 20 years in the United States, but they're not going to do anything about so many of the other problems that we have. And what we need to be 100%, it needs to be crystal clear as we advocate for UBI, that it cannot be used by the rich and by big corporations and by oligarchs to say, we don't need to regulate, we don't need living wage. We don't need to do anything else because we did drop $9,000 into everybody's pocket. That's my concern at this point.
I do wonder whether or not the universal basic income would be entirely good for the rich and corporations, though, because the UBI would be redistributive, right? I mean, that money would have to come from somewhere. It would likely come from the rich, so maybe they would see their taxes increase. So when people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk come out and say, we're in favor of universal basic income, maybe they are just acting in the best interest of the country and want to pay it forward.
Yeah, I mean, most of the proposals wouldn't require an increase in taxes because you would just reshuffle other programs that are out there. And you might even actually save money because you would eliminate the bureaucracies required for a lot of those programs.
Shrink the welfare state.
So in that case, it wouldn't necessarily have that effect. But we'll follow it. I'm interested in hearing from the audience what your thoughts are. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Ronald Pearson. Ronald, thank you. We do depend on the support of members like Ronald, and we also depend on the support of not only new members, but our longtime sustaining members. And today's sustaining member of the day is Cam McNeely. Cam's been with us for years and years, and I remember when Cam first signed up, in fact, and he's been with us ever since. It feels like just yesterday, Cam, even though it has been at this point close to 7 years, going on 7 years. Join Ronald and Cam by becoming members at davidpakman.com/membership. We have a coupon code, VOTESOON18, which will save you 40%. We're also trying to get 500 new financial supporters in order to expand the show, increase the number of shows and the duration of every show. You can do that by becoming a member. You can also do it by being a patron at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow, or by becoming a sponsor of our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show. This is something really funny. Last night I was browsing the David Pakman Show subreddit, and there was a thread that someone made pointing out that there should be sort of a David Pakman Show bingo of sorts, showing that there are a few different catchphrases, a sort of drinking game or bingo of the game. Anytime David says the phrase or words gong show, abortive, or depraved, listeners have to take a shot. And this gave me the idea that we should actually develop like a David Pakman Show bingo board. I don't know what we would do with it. We could turn it into like a 1,000-piece puzzle. We could send it out as a sort of poster print. I don't know what exactly we would do with it. And the Reddit participant is including some good ones. I think also on it would have to be, if I accidentally punch my mic, that would have to be like the center square, which sometimes happens when I get very, very impassioned about a story. I think I say vile quite a bit. Depraved is a good one. Gong show is a good one, and so is abortive. Asking a live caller if they're on speakerphone should definitely be a box on the bingo board. Joking about how infrequently I mention membership, I think might be something that could be on there. Quite frankly is another phrase that I tend to use a lot. Any number of is, of course, a longtime classic that goes back a long ways, but I don't know what else should be on it, right? And I'm curious to hear from the audience. And I don't even know, like, is a bingo board, looks like are they 5 by 5 is what it looks like from this picture? So we need 25 total phrases or words. I think we can get to 25.
Yeah, I've got a few too. It's a whole thing. And then you also like to impersonate Trump a lot.
Yeah.
So many could be a square, bigly or big league, depending on the
Yeah,
grammar.
although I don't know that it should, if I'm satirically using someone else's catchphrase, I think that's a little dishonest for a bingo board, because they should really be my phrases, not ones that I've sort of jokingly appropriated from someone else.
I mean, if we do this, you have to like tune that out, though. You can't think about the bingo board because otherwise there'll be some like inherent bias there.
Yeah, I know.
Where
I'll be
you're deliberately
either
choosing words or choosing not to say some words.
Right, but presumably the bingo boards are randomized so that not everyone has the same board, and that way, because otherwise everybody wins at the same time, right? As long as they're paying attention. So write in, tell me what other words and phrases should be there. Any number. I know that there are lots of others. Maybe one would be when a Hatriot uses your instead of your, like you apostrophe RE versus YOUR, like that would be part of the bingo a bingo item. I'm open, okay? So get in touch, comment on the YouTube video for this story, comment on that Reddit thread at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Email me, tweet me, whatever. I'm going to start putting together a list, and once we get 25 good ones, we'll figure out something to do with the bingo board. I think it's going to be a stunningly good idea. Maybe you get a free bingo board with a new membership in the future, something like that. Okay, big breaking news story. According to the Kremlin, Donald Trump has invited Vladimir Putin to the White House. And you might say, well, who cares? We should want better relationships with Russia. We should want to be Russia's friend. This is great. Yay. And then we get back to reality. And we learned that this reportedly happened during that same phone call a couple of weeks ago, where after being told, do not congratulate Vladimir Putin on his sham election win, Donald Trump did exactly that, congratulated Vladimir Putin on his win, mentioned nothing about election meddling, mentioned nothing about the continued suspicious deaths of Russian dissidents around the world. And the claim about this invitation to maybe come to the White House for Vladimir Putin came from a Kremlin aide named Yuri Ushakov, who said to Russian journalists that, quote, if everything will be all right, I hope that the Americans will not back away from their own proposal to discuss the possibility of holding a summit. When our president spoke on the phone, it was Trump who proposed holding the first meeting in Washington in the White House. Putin hasn't been to the White House since 2005, when George W. Bush was president, when the U.S. and Russia, I guess, sort of had a better relationship, you could say. So why do we care? Well, we care because this is Vladimir Putin's manipulation of Donald Trump bearing fruit, right? It's another example of Putin getting what he wants, which is being seen as a sort of serious world leader that gets invited and the red carpet is rolled out for them and they get to go into the most special of places, although certainly the Oval Office has become less special since Donald Trump has appropriated it. What better situation for Putin than a long in-person meeting with Trump on Trump's own turf, where Putin, who is very skilled, will use his skills to manipulate Trump. And even when you look at how we found out about this, right, even the release of this news by Russia is part of the ploy to embarrass Trump and just create chaos, because now it's win-win for Vladimir Putin. If Trump admits, yeah, I did say that he could come to the White House, well, why wasn't it mentioned? And why would Trump do it? And why would he reward Russia with inviting Vladimir Putin to the White House? And then if Trump denies it, it immediately calls into question whether Trump is lying, something that he does a lot. And if so, it would make us wonder, why is this something that Trump would lie about, which only increases more of the suspicion about what's going on with Russia? The fact that we're first hearing about this from Russia is sort of part of the chaos that Russia is so expertly catalyzing. And we once again, we've got to apply Trump's razor to this, as I mentioned yesterday. No matter what you believe the limits of geopolitical stupidity to be, the current administration, the Trump administration, will act in the most ignorant and stupid way possible, to the point that you will be shocked. And in fact, the most likely scenario is that we get initially a denial from the Trump administration, followed by a White House visit by Vladimir Putin, and then there will never actually be a follow-up question about, wait, I thought you denied that you had invited him here. The way it always goes is some version of that, right? We hear from the Washington Post or the New York Times something that sounds totally nuts. Then, Trump uses his bathtub as a toilet, or something that sounds absolutely nutty. White House immediately condemns, says the president would never use his bathtub as a toilet. It's the fake news media, including that failing fake news, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Washington Post. They're smearing the president. Then, like 2 days later, Trump goes to Twitter and says, hey, yeah, all right, I use my bathtub as a toilet. And Hillary was using her bathtub as a toilet before I did. And the FBI refuses to look into when Hillary Clinton is using her bathtub as a toilet. No one cares about that. And I've been treated very, very unfairly. And then the sort of cherry on top is 3 days go by. And then Trump says, what? I never said I use my bathtub as a toilet. I was misquoted by the loser New York Times. I never said it. And then 100 grand goes to another porn star and hush money, and we all forget about it because we're like 10 scandals past it. That is the sort of MO of how these things develop. Will we ever hear about it again? I genuinely don't know. I wanted to talk about this yesterday, but didn't have time. Last week, after weeks and weeks of not taking questions in a press conference, after days of having nothing public on his calendar whatsoever, Trump decided to do basically a campaign rally. He went to Ohio to do a rally in front of a friendly crowd. It's kind of like what you do when you're running for president. Supposedly, it was going to be an infrastructure speech. By the way, how often is it Infrastructure Week? It seems like almost every week in this administration is Infrastructure Week. Trump went completely and totally off the rails. It turned into a very strange, garbled rant, resembling the English language only loosely and demonstrating a sort of Sarah Palin-like inability to communicate anything of meaning through language. And it got so bad that the three major cable networks, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, all just cut away from the speech, although you'll be pleased to know that good old Fox Business Network stayed with the entire thing all the way through. Here is Fox bailing when it got weird. Former George W. Bush White House Press Secretary Dana Perino, who's now a Fox News anchor, fittingly, explaining that they are going away. And she looked sort of in physical pain as she said it.
32,000 soldiers.
All right, you've been watching President Trump, who is in Ohio giving a speech, a wide-ranging speech, but mostly focusing on his infrastructure plan. And former White House Deputy Chief of Staff Karl Rove is back with me.
I like that. Wide-ranging is code for Trump is all over the place. Real quick, go to Karl Rove to try to save us here. So even Fox cutting away, even though they did stay with it a few minutes longer than CNN and MSNBC. So here are just random weird moments. The entire speech was totally off the rails, all right? Here's just a random 20 seconds of Trump from the speech.
We're a very important and respected, in some circles, Democrat said we should get rid of our Second Amendment. In other words, get rid of it. That's really it's tyranny. Could be right about that. So we're going to protect our Second Amendment. That's not going to happen. We have the best judges. We put on a tremendous amount of great federal district court judges. We'll be setting records. We are setting records. Appeals court judges. Supreme Court judge, fantastic, Justice Gorsuch.
What is he talking about? Setting records? Like, what the hell is this guy on? Just another few seconds from Trump's bizarre speech that networks couldn't even stay with.
And we didn't have one Democrat who voted for that. They want to raise your taxes, and they want people to come in from the border, and they want, I can't imagine they want, but certainly drugs are flowing across borders. We need walls. We started building our wall. I'm so proud of it. We started. We have 1.6 billion. And we've already started. You saw the pictures yesterday. I said, what a thing of beauty. And on September 28th, we go further.
Yeah, that was a lie, by the way. The pictures he's referring to were from the replacement of 2 miles of border fence dating back to the 1990s. We've got one more clip. Again, just disjointed rantings of a madman.
We spent, and I was against it from the beginning. They try and say, well, maybe not. I was against it from the beginning. And by the way, we're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon. Very soon we're coming out. We're going to have 100% of the caliphate, as they call it, sometimes referred to as land. We're taking it all back quickly. But we're going to be coming out of there real soon. Going to get back to our country, where we belong, where we want to be. But just think of it. We spent, as of 3 months ago, $7 trillion, not billion, not million, 7 trillion with a T. Nobody ever heard of the word trillion until 10 years ago. We spent $7 trillion in the Middle East. We'd build a school, they'd blow it up. We'd build it again, they'd blow it up. We'd build it again. Hasn't been blown up yet, but it will be. But if we want a school in Ohio to fix the windows, you can't get the money. If you want a school in Pennsylvania or Iowa to get federal money, you can't get the money. We spent $7 trillion in the Middle East. And you know what we have for it? Nothing. Remember, I used to say, keep the oil as a civilian. I used to say, did anybody hear me say that? That's before I decided to go on this journey with all of you. I got tired of watching.
What on earth is this guy talking about? It is the disjointed rantings of someone who understands nothing. It's always infrastructure week or month or whatever. Nothing actually happens except Trump just showing up and talking about his random musings here. And there's two phases of a Trump speech. There's the horrible syntax of the teleprompter reading, where he's looking off at an angle and saying, and if we were to become a better nation of, and then we would, right? Like, it's just, he can't read it. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And then you see when he shifts off the teleprompter and looks straight ahead, but then you don't even know what the guy's talking about because he's just completely off the rails and improvising. And I hope that soon we actually get a press conference. Supposedly he's doing one today. Questions like, Mr. President, can you just say definitively, did you have sex with Stormy Daniels? Did you realize that your people were knowingly and directly dealing with Russian intelligence officers? Did you know about the $130,000 that Michael Cohen paid Stormy Daniels? Have you reimbursed? Some specific questions, and you can't put them out there because he could end up saying something horribly self-incriminating. So I hope we get a press conference soon. These speeches are so bizarre that even Fox News had to cut away from it.
Even if he did get those questions, though, I think he would go off on a tangent about how he won the 2016 election. It was greatest victory of all time. Something like that to deflect.
Maybe he would, but I think he would very likely end up saying something totally self-incriminating, and it's pretty clear they're trying to keep him away from those types of questions. Hopefully he will get some today. Bizarre speech that a lot of people on our subreddit noticed, and you can join that discussion, if you can stomach it, at davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Kelly Jones, who was previously married to Alex Jones of Infowars fame. We've been covering some of what has been going on with Alex Jones over the last 6 to 12 months. And Kelly is here to shed some more light onto really a lot of different things. And Kelly, I know that this has just been not a good moment for you and for your family in many ways. So first of all, I really appreciate you talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me on, David.
So I don't even really know where to begin, so I'll just pick somewhere and we'll sort of go from there. You were married to Alex Jones. At a certain point, we learned that you have concerns as to how your son, Rex, may be manipulated or brainwashed by Alex Jones. Some of our audience may know that Rex has been participating in some Infowars content, and I've even received emails from people sort of concerned about what's going on there. So, I mean, big picture, generally speaking, what's your sort of biggest concern around the kids right now?
Well, David, as many people are aware, last year in April 2017, a jury decided for me to be primary parent to our 3 beautiful children. This was after years of family litigation, incepted primarily by Alex. I was on the defense for years. I had less time than drug dealers and prostitutes. Went from being the primary caregiver to these kids to having almost no access to a jury victory. Spent, every cent I had liquid getting that victory. And the judge who acted with such tremendous bias in the case actually just left the kids primarily with Alex. So number one, I don't think America understands that. And I'm so sad to even hear my son's name on the air. I've fought really hard to keep their privacy and their innocence protected throughout all this. And I realized, like, when things happened last week, when things started coming out, I said some really, strong words. I mean, my son is actively, apparently, like, watching my Twitter account, which breaks my heart. I've told him he's not allowed. But the bottom line is this: the judge basically kept all footage from Infowars from coming in before the jury. This footage included Alex drunk, raging, threatening, making a felonious threat to Congressman Schiff, saying, basically challenging him to a duel. There's a speculation that was felonious, and really concerning things. And then Alex got up on the stand and said he was an actor and that all of the Infowars stuff was irrelevant. I'm here to tell America, number one, that was a great travesty of justice, a biased trial in the first place. But despite all that, from what I showed, the evidence was so concerning to the jury that they said these kids need to go with their mama. And the judge has just left them there. And clearly, it is all about Infowars. If you're a child of Alex Jones's and his household, that is the plan that's laid out before you, and it's a heartache,
So Kelly, let me see. You've hit on a few
irresponsible.
important things that I want to go through piece by piece. You referenced this concept that during the trial there was the assertion made, and you can correct me. I had read that it was by Alex Jones' attorney, but you're saying Alex made it. But in either case, there's this idea that you can't evaluate him in the real world based on what you see on Infowars, because that's sort of a performance. It's a character that he's playing. Now, let me lay out the following question for you. I met Alex at a radio conference years and years ago. My impression was, because of how he acted there in private compared to how he acts on the program, that he is sort of playing a character on the program, that maybe he doesn't believe in all of these conspiracy theories, that maybe he is sort of playing it up. Are you here today able to tell us whether or not this is a character or the real Alex Jones that is seen on the program?
Well, first of all, I want to remind your audience that any testimony under oath is your word, and if it's a lie, it's aggravated perjury, and it should be criminally tried.
Sure.
Regarding whether or not it's a persona, apparently in court it is a persona when it behooves him to try to get child custody. But then the next day he goes on his own program to say, no, I'm not a performance actor. I'm a performance actor when I play, Lizard Man or whatever. But really, in real life, I care about all these things. As a former member of his household and knowing even now how my children have very concerning views about many different things, the paranoia, the bizarre concepts are definitely living in Alex Jones and in his household. But beyond that, I would say that the really concerning behaviors that affect, children's development or a family's development, the violence, the rage, the anger, those are worse in private life, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking at his best self on the air.
So
and
Kelly,
this
you're
kind of
saying,
charismatic,
just
like,
to make
we
sure
love to
I
hate him
understand what
kind
you're
of guy.
saying.
No,
You
he's a
never
scary dude. He's frightening.
You never saw anything in the private Alex Jones that suggested that the conspiracy theories that he espouses and all of that stuff are a joke or for the show. As far as you know, all of those beliefs are actually sincerely held beliefs.
I mean, listen, I actively had to homeschool my kids. I actively had to, my kids are, I don't want to say that actually because that would violate their privacy, but there's a lot of things in my life that I would not have done if I had not been married to Alex Jones. Absolutely. Like, he believes all that stuff and worse. And it's really all he cares about. He doesn't really have any other interests or any other life. He's just a cocoon of paranoia, narcissism, superimposing these feelings over his family and his entourage. I wouldn't say friends. I don't know that he really has any real friends. Everyone around him is highly paid. Which is sad. I'm not saying that to diss him. I'm not here to disparage him. He's a guy with serious problems that instead of being helped by the court or people that could have helped our family, they empowered his narcissistic rage. So if he's not thinking about it, he's watching himself think about it, basically, is what I was going to say. It's a mess, and it's horrible to be around.
Was there a period, let me put it a different way. Did you always question the conspiracy theories and the beliefs that were circulating in your household from Alex Jones? Did you have a phase where you were basically indoctrinated into the same stuff and you broke out of it in some way?
I mean, absolutely. I was indoctrinated. I moved back to Austin for my best friend was dying, and I was in a very vulnerable state in my life. I had actually just been working for PETA. I was also disillusioned about that. So I came back to Austin and met this guy who was kind of interesting. We had a show with the same producer on Access TV. And he was just real different than anybody I'd ever met. And slowly over time, it became, you need to come work for me in the house. You need to do this. And I was like, I don't know, and I was 29. I was definitely not completely thinking everything through. And a few years later, after the boiling water turned up to me, the frog he always talks about in the pot, right? Suddenly I was living in a domestically violent situation, completely isolated from all friends and family. I tried to leave repeatedly over the years, but I would say at the beginning, I definitely assimilated some of that. And that's part of the reason why I'm talking out. I would say I'm responsible for helping Alex with his initial success because my background was in grassroots publicity. So I helped him get on the wire for the first time. I got him his first big guest. But as he sort of progressed, or should we say regressed or deteriorated, I mean, the Alex Jones you see today is actually very different than the original Alex Jones. And I would say definitely by the time September 11th came around and I was standing in the front of our street with a candle, my heart broken for our nation like everyone else, and he was ranting and raging, I was like, whoa, I don't understand what this is about. And I did file many years prior. I understand that people might not have a lot of sympathy for me, and I get that. I do understand that, and I'm sorry for whatever part I've had to play. But I'm here also to tell people like this is reached a concerning level, and you can see some of the tweets, and I'm kind of getting on another path here, but he's become an incredibly powerful guy, and his paranoia and conspiracy that was always nonpartisan has shifted into really he's a propaganda mouthpiece. There's no other way to look at him. And that mere fact shocks everybody. But yes, I'd say by the time my last child was born, or my youngest child, around 10 years ago, I was not listening to his show. I was actively opposed to it and just really disgusted actually by the content. I was still somewhat involved in the business for sure with, management stuff. And I tried to leave. That's all I can say,
Kelly, so as far as the inclusion of one of your kids on the program that is just publicly viewable to anybody as of late, and again, it's something people in my audience have expressed concern about. What do you make of it? I mean, do you think that your son is sort of being coerced into doing this? Is it a question of wanting to do it, but because in some way he's been brainwashed by your ex-husband? Like, what do you make of that?
Well, I would say 100%, that this child, first of all, Alex is in complete violation of court order. He's enjoined from broadcasting my son, and he's enjoined from making unilateral decisions about my son. My son, I never see. And at the time of the verdict, he was really happy to see me. And what's come into play with the case, which is relevant to your question, is this phenomenon called parental alienation. Parental alienation is a systematic, abusive, horribly psychologically abusive behaviors that effectively turn children against, one parent turns kids against the other one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's pretty common. People understand that in the sort of vernacular. But Rex, he has never had a chance. He's brilliant. My son, he's so smart, and he was so exuberant and engaged. And I think that beyond the endangerment, which it really does endanger him, there really are kooks out there that both are like, go get him, tiger, and are saying way worse things than that to him.
Yeah.
But beyond that, he's just been groomed for this role for years and years. And I said something, I was talking to somebody the other day. It's like, say you were a car salesman and you only liked a certain brand of car. And at 12 years old, you told your kid, this is what you're going to do for your life. You're going to sell this car, and this is the only car you're going to like, and all of the cars are terrible. And that you made that kid get on and broadcast that at 15, I think people would have a problem with that. Children need to develop their identity independently of their parents. It came out in court, and therefore I can say it, that Alex has a narcissistic personality disorder. And a big component of that is this overlay over the kids, where kids have to, or family members need to reflect you. He's brilliant. My son, he wanted to be a personal trainer. He told me he wanted his first car to be a Prius because he didn't want his way paved for him. He wanted to make his own way. And I think that's a little bit out the window now, and he's all over still, like big media, and I'm so worried about him, I'm so worried about him.
Kelly, let's pause the conversation there. We're speaking with Kelly Jones. She was previously married to Alex Jones of Infowars fame, and we'll continue our conversation where we left off.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I love this story. The Catholic Church and the Vatican are now scrambling after Pope Francis sort of appeared to question whether there even is a hell, which is kind of a pretty basic belief of Catholicism, but you don't have to worry because the flunkies are claiming he was just misunderstood. What happened is that during a recent meeting, Eugenio Scalfari, who's the now 93-year-old founder of a Vatican newspaper, asked Pope Francis, where do bad souls go? Of course, the correct answer in the context of the Catholic Church is supposed to be, well, they go to hell. And Pope Francis is quoted by Scalfari as saying, quote, they are not punished. Those who repent obtain God's forgiveness and take their place among the ranks of those who contemplate him. But those who do not repent and cannot be forgiven disappear. A hell doesn't exist. The disappearance of sinning souls exists. This led to Panic at the Vatican. That should be the name for a funny romantic comedy, Panic at the Vatican. And if you're the Vatican, you sort of need the threat of eternity in hell to get people to fall in line, right? This is one of the ways in which you get people to do what you want them to do, is convince them that if they don't do what you want them to do, that they're going to end up spending an eternity in hell. They are writing this off as a misquote, but they're not even offering an alternative meaning. They're just saying quotes of the Pope are not accurate. The Vatican said that the, quote, literal words pronounced by the Pope are not quoted, and that, quote, no quotation of the article should be considered as a faithful transcription of the words of the Holy Father. Then the other interpretation explaining what's going on here is that what he meant isn't that hell doesn't exist, but that hell as a place of fire and brimstone and misery isn't real. Like, there's no hell if you imagine the burning inferno, but there is hell if it's just separation from God and the disappearance of the soul or something like that. But then you're really finding an explanation to just fit what it was that was allegedly said here. The problem with that is that there are endless portrayals of hell by Catholics as exactly a place of fire and brimstone in their own scriptures, in the book of Revelation, in Corinthians. Anyway, I don't really care about the specifics. I just love how this Pope, who is from Argentina, by the way, has thrown the Catholic Church into these moments of chaos as a result of just steering away even slightly from some of the orthodoxy of the church. And the one sort of caveat here is that the interviewer, Scalfari, Eugenio Scalfari, he does have somewhat of a history of being, I guess I'll call it, fast and loose with the truth in some cases, but it still seems weird that he would make up an interview whole cloth, both from a sort of marketing and PR perspective for his newspaper and from a legal perspective. But this is super interesting because we've been following the move away from Catholicism that's been going on. You've seen people leaving Catholicism because they've stopped being religious altogether, right? Like, that's one layer, which is in general, particularly younger generations are becoming less and less religious over time. But there's this whole other angle, which is that there are Catholics who have also just left Catholicism and moved to Protestantism, meaning non-Catholic Christianity. And part of it has to do with the specifics of the Catholic Church, and it's sort of feeling, quite frankly, there's one of those possible bingo phrases, quite frankly, like a dated and sort of in downfall organization, even though they still have like 1.2, 1.3 billion adherents. So it's going to be an interesting decade, I think, for the Catholic Church upcoming.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing such a progressive pope in Pope Francis. I mean, the guy seems to be okay with gay marriage. He accepts that climate change exists. It's just interesting how saying that hell doesn't exist is a bridge too far for these Catholics. Like,
yeah, and
that's the last straw. We can't have that.
Straight up panicking and saying that's simply not what he said. Send me your thoughts. I know that there are current and ex-Catholics in the show audience, and I'd be interested in hearing from them for sure. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail that came in yesterday.
Hey, David. I was wondering if you think that the trend towards, a more automatized warfare using drones and stuff like that is a net benefit over, the traditional method of just going and doing on-the-ground warfare. I guess there's the sense that there's a disconnect that comes from using drones, but at the same time, I guess it does save a lot more American lives. So what do you think about that in terms of the pros and cons?
Yeah, well, listen. You're absolutely right. This is a really important topic. You're absolutely right that drone warfare saves American lives. That's absolutely true, because Americans are able now to go and carry out a military operation with no boots on the ground and not even with pilots in the air, right? Just with literally remote-controlled aerial vehicles controlled by a pilot sitting in front of a computer somewhere. So that certainly reduces the death toll of some of these operations for Americans. We are told by the advocates of drone warfare that it also reduces the death toll for our enemies, because the precision of some of these drones allow the American military to strike only their intended target and to reduce collateral damage and civilian deaths. How true that is, I definitely have a question about. The real problem with drone warfare is sort of a psychological one, and the disconnect that exists, because if you are boots on the ground, you could still carry out actions that are humanitarian in nature. You could carry out actions that are totally deplorable in nature, but you have a completely different connection to what it is that you're doing than if you are sitting somewhere in the United States or on an army base in Germany or wherever the case may be, piloting what effectively is a remote control airplane. And the sort of technologization, I know that's not a word, but the technologizing of warfare in these ways, I think, is very, very problematic in terms of how it might influence what standards and practices we use to determine when we are going to do something and when we are not going to do something. And of course, that doesn't mean there aren't rules of engagement. It doesn't mean that there aren't legal mechanisms that are sort of overriding and controlling a lot of what it is that's going on here. So to get back to the initial question, because that's really what I want to get to, and your question was, in the net, do I think that drone warfare is a benefit or not? I think that if you're thinking in very concrete, short-term style, you can say fewer people are probably dying when we use drones as opposed to other forms of military incursion. The long-term answer may be a very different one, where we are seeing a continued sort of devaluing of the lives of those populations that we are targeting. And in total, the existence of drone warfare also might make it possible to carry out way more incursions in geographically disparate areas. So I think that in the short term, fewer people are dying. Over the long term, I'm not at all convinced that this is a positive development, but it's something we've done interviews around before and that I certainly plan to continue covering. On the bonus show today, we will talk about the teachers' strike across Oklahoma based around compensation and wages. I'm going to talk about a Trump official asking Congress to start reining in a consumer watchdog agency. No surprise at all that that's going on. And also Grindr, the gay dating app, has decided to stop sharing HIV status to third-party vendors. Third-party vendors and advertisers used to be able to actually target ads to users of the platform that disclose their potentially HIV positive status, which of course would be relevant in the dating sphere, but also would make them potential targets for particular products and services. And Grindr has decided they're no longer going to allow their third-party vendors to have access to that information. We will be talking about that and much more on today's bonus show, which you can get access to by signing up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. We do have a 40% off coupon code that you can take advantage of. It is VoteSoon18. And you can also make a pledge on Patreon to get access to the bonus show at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Thanks for watching today. We'll talk to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.